This week on Design Development,
Dave, thanks for joining us on Design Development today.
Yeah, nice to see you. Thanks for having me.
the fourth generation leader to run Fontaine Brothers.
What's the greatest business lesson you've learned running Fontaine that you didn't learn in business school? My guest today once described himself as an entrepreneur who ended up in a great family business. Dave Fontaine Jr. is the fourth generation to run Fontaine Brothers, a construction firm his family started back in 1933. And instead of just keeping the lights on, he's grown it, taking on some of the largest projects in New England while also personally investing in construction tech on the side. Today, Dave and I get into the question every long-running family business eventually has to answer. How do you modernize without losing what made the place worth keeping in the first place? Dave, thanks for joining us on Design Development today.
Yeah, nice to see you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to dig in. We have a lot in common: family business background, entrepreneurial, we got golf. I want to kick things off by you've referred to yourself as an entrepreneur who ended up in a great family business. Like, what is something you almost chased, but the family business brought you in?
Oh man, it's a good question. Like as far back as I can remember, I've loved business. I've loved the team building part of it. I mean, I remember being on the bus one day in like elementary school, and we were pulling into my neighborhood, and there was a detour that was sending like an unusually high amount of traffic down through our neighborhood. And I got to get a lemonade stand out. Like demand is through the roof.
Demand is through
Um,
the roof.
it's just kind of something that's always, that I've been drawn to. I went to school at Bentley, which is a business school out in Boston area, and was around a ton of friends that went into, finance and venture capital, private equity, that space. So, definitely have tried to, bring the business principles to Fontaine and also, use some of the skills that we have from the construction solving problems to, help in other areas and, invest and advise in tech companies and stuff like that on the entrepreneurial side.
Was this a foregone conclusion growing up? Everyone expected you to step right into the family business, or did you have the option to
I,
go
I
elsewhere?
definitely had the option. My dad was great in the sense that he supported me, allowed me to be involved as much as I wanted to. I started working in the field when I was 14 because we had a job that was right down the street from the office. So he'd drive me in with him in the morning, drop me off. I'd work till 3:30 and walk back to the office and fold plans. He was always pretty, kind of transparent and straightforward with info on the business as much as I wanted to learn. So like that was super. But he also, and really the family and the company, there was never this pressure of you have to do it or, what's going to happen if you don't. It was just something, I think it worked out because I really enjoyed it. I liked it. I loved being around the guys. I liked working in the field. I loved the business aspect of it as I got older. So it was something I always enjoyed and was drawn to. And I had a great opportunity to go in, but I think that it probably helped that there wasn't, this overarching feeling of pressure. You have to go do this too. Cause I think a lot of people get trapped in that.
100%. So I grew up, my father runs a structural steel fabrication and erecting and a miss iron company, and our house was a mile and a half from the shop growing up. And so like even in middle school, like my day job was sweeping the 40,000 square foot facility, and I hated picking up the piles. I get so bored of sweeping. I would just sweep piles and leave them there. So everyone called me Piles. But it's like getting a ride. My dad left too early, so I used to ride my bike. And one of the things that at one point I tried taking my two-stroke in the morning, but I'm going to the shop at 7 a.m. My neighbors didn't like that too much, so I still had to ride my bike every day. But that's the way to get there. Stepping in, like in my journey, I remember thinking like I would have only been you're a fourth generation owner. I would have been second generation. And so like a lot of my friends would be like, you're just gonna take over your dad's company. And like, do you go to college? And I was like, well, statistics show second generation typically torpedoes the company, and I don't want to be that statistic.
It's amazing, man. We, are very lucky to have had, the long history that we've had, in the business. I mean, even, growing up, we were doing all hard bid work. And when I look at a bid list now from 2005, 6, 7, 8, 10 range, and the names that we were bidding against back then, a couple are still around, but the majority are not. So it's, we certainly have an appreciation for the difficulty of the industry and, making those decisions that keep you around long term. Someone said back in the day, a consultant from FMI who we've used over the years, like they did a study on general contractors, and they were like, the number one job of a general contractor is just to stay in business, right? Through different business cycles and ups and downs and trends changing and all those things. And I think that, we're fortunate that we've always had an amazing core group of people. The leadership of the company has always been very involved in the day to day. We like what we do. We enjoy the process. So I think that it's made it, easy to be in an industry that's so demanding, all things considered, but definitely are, proud of the history. And I take a lot of, weight and responsibility in carrying that on in the right way and also helping us grow and sustain into a future that is ever changing.
As you should, Dave. I mean, your Fontaine Brothers is stepping into rare air. I think you're approaching 100 years after you founded in 1933. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. 1933 was when they incorporated. They had actually, they'd been building on their own since the late 20s. My great grandfather and his brother came down from Canada. They were teenagers, boarding house, Springfield, no English, like the whole, first generation immigrant story in the late 1800s. And, they had basically worked as carpenters from the time they were 13, 14. And, by the late 20s, early 30s, country was in the Great Depression, unemployment was 25%. It was one of those, you got to make your own luck and bet on yourself stories. And they had a house in Chicopee, Mass, and they signed over the house to buy $12,000 worth of lumber to take on a project on their own. And they had to pay, I think it was $100 every quarter, and then a balloon payment 12 months later. And so they did the project. They were able to get paid, and that was the beginning of the company.
Yeah, that'll get you pushing a construction schedule real quick when your house is online. I applaud that entrepreneurial journey. And so you step in 2011. You mentioned some of the hard bid work the company was doing. Could you give us a snapshot of what Fontaine looked like in 2011, the types of work you were doing, and what has changed moving forward?
Yeah. So, going back, like, I think I started working in the field in 2001, and like all through, that early 2000s, 2001 to 2007, 8, 9 was actually, we were super busy. All the work that we were doing at that time was hard bid, lump sum. That was the only procurement method that the state allowed for the large public work. And so we were self-performing concrete, carpentry, masonry, had, probably 250 tradespeople on at that time. And in 2004, the CM at risk delivery method became, legal in Massachusetts. And a lot of the larger work started to go that way. We at the time had not done CM at risk. We didn't have pre-construction. We didn't have marketing, BD, a lot of things you need to win and execute that work. And so we stayed locked in on the hard bid market, but the hard bid market ended up getting tougher and tougher, right? You had, more people competing for fewer projects. You had the big projects that were going CM, so those were off the table. So by 2010, when I was graduating school, we were at that point, I think we were down to 2 or 3 active projects. And we had not, won a hard bid job in about a year because everything was just so, competitive. People taking on projects that ultimately put them out of business in several cases, but we avoided and stayed disciplined. But yeah, it was a difficult time because we really got slow. We had to, focus on just trying to keep people busy. We actually went to 4 days a week in the office at one point, and, there was just that like back against the wall of, we've got to win work, but really we needed to communicate better, like the value of what we could do. Being a successful hard bid contractor, we were still relationship focused. We had, clients who loved working with us, even in that hard bid, which can be more adversarial. And so we worked really hard on building that CM at risk business. And, that really started to take off for us in like 2013. We got Auburn Middle School, which was about a $35 million job at the time, but just, super focused on it, knocked it out of the park. That led to more opportunities in Worcester and Shrewsbury and these places that have become repeat clients, more opportunity in the private sector. And so we've grown the CM at risk business from, zero to about 55-60% probably of our revenue. And we've also kept the hard bid side really active, which we're proud of.
Awesome. And that hard bid world, so you're doing mostly public work back then, in leading up into the great financial crisis, the GFC. Um, and even those projects really shifted from hard bid to CM at risk. What was like the big move between those two types of pursuits, let's say on a new project, that changed for you?
Yeah, the pursuit motion is completely different, right? So on a hard bid job, you have to get pre-qualified, which is based on references and similar projects and all that. And then once you're pre-qualified, if you put in a lump sum price, they open it in an envelope that, town hall or electronically now. And if you're the low bidder, you get the contract and you go to town, plans and specs. And if you're second, then, thanks for trying. And on the CM side of things, they hire the CM much earlier in the process. They'll hire us while the project is still in design development. We're providing constructability review, value engineering. We're helping them estimate the project from that very early stage, sometimes even before the project's been approved by the voters. They'll get us on board to build confidence in the
You're almost
number.
building the budget for them to go to the board with, right?
Exactly, yeah. So in order to play that role, we had to develop an entirely new approach to marketing, business development, interviews, presentations, because the hard bid side, it's just, qualifications and number based. And we also needed to build, the pre-construction machine for, doing all that work, right? Estimating these things through a million line items of detail, value engineering, constructability reviews, coordination. So, the building part of it, like we were and still are, supremely strong at, like the actual, construction side of things was certainly our strength back in 2010. We just needed to build out that CM side.
You can visually see the difference in an estimating department for a hard bid versus the CM at risk. It's like at the hard bid side, it's not relationship based. It's just numbers based. So you can just have like an engine that's pricing things and then putting that paperwork out. They don't have to actually negotiate or manage or communicate a decision. It's the numbers, the number. And in the CM at risk, you have a totally different soft side to your entire pre-con.
Absolutely. And the level of detail, when you put a hard bid estimate together, you get prices from subcontractors. You need to go through and see what they've carried and not carried and level them to a certain extent. But you're carrying one number for steel, one number for drywall, one number for concrete. When you look at a CM estimate, it's thousands of line items down to every minute detail of what is this caulk joint cost per lineal foot, and, what is this window opening versus another one. So the entire process and organization around it is a whole different level of effort and detail for sure.
And let's say on these public jobs, is this a pre-con effort? Is this a paid engagement? These are services that you're providing to the town, or is this all like kind of pre-con building to the future job?
There's payment involved on the public side. You propose a pre-con fee normally on a monthly basis during the duration. And I think that for, often it's kind of a loss leader, like you're getting reimbursed something, but not what the total effort costs. But on the public side, there's payment involved. And on the private side, sometimes there is, sometimes it isn't. It's client dependent.
Yeah, that's the negotiation piece on the private side for sure. And in that public pursuit process, the CM at risk, what are they awarding that pre-construction contract based on? And that's the reputation, that's the pitch. Is it subjective and it's not hard bid?
Yeah. So normally the process is they'll, advertise a project. You'll respond via an RFQ, which is, maybe a 50, 60 page document, your qualifications, references, past projects. And then they'll decide. Sometimes they interview everyone that submits an RFQ. Sometimes they'll cut it to a short list of 3 or 4 of, who they rank the highest. And then, you'll put together an RFP, which is a 300 to 400 page document where you go in complete detail of your logistics, your schedule, your proposed approach to basically every part of the project. And then you submit that. You also submit a price proposal that stipulates your fee, your staffing, your insurance rates, and everything. And then you go to an interview, right? So in the interview, you're meeting with the architect, the OPM, the folks from the awarding authority, be it, town or the state. And basically you interview along with however many other folks they're interviewing. And then they close the doors and talk about you all and decide who they want to move forward with.
Thank you for sharing that process. I wanted to kind of drive that home because that to me is a massive organizational shift. And that's what I wanted to highlight in like it's an established 80-plus-year-old business at this point, but the industry changed. And so the business model, the go-to-market strategy had to change. And that was something you started to steward. And that kind of paints the picture into this next piece where you're still maintaining the culture and the values and the great building competencies that Fontaine has had forever, but you had to modernize this business to build this new go-to-market engine strategy, better communicate your value.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we definitely we didn't have a building problem, right? Like we never had issues on our projects opening on time, being safe, being on budget, any of those things, which is, a large and very important part of the building process. And it was a, kind of sales and marketing engine that we did not have at all because it wasn't required, right? There was no reason, if you were focused on public work in Massachusetts, prior to 2004, CM at risk in that entire selection process we described did not exist. Even for the largest, most complicated projects, it was all lump sum bidding. So, we had a phenomenally effective process for that, self-to-form, all those things that were really important there. And for me, it was clear that in order for the business to grow and continue to thrive in the post CM at risk world, we needed to, be competitive on those things. We needed to play in that market. But at the same time, I looked at it like I had a great foundation to build off of. We had a ton of teams with, great experience and resume. We have always, been lucky and, been intentional about culture and retention and all those things. So I certainly had a ton of, great kind of building blocks to move into that CM at risk direction. And we tried to keep that top of mind, right? Like it wasn't saying, man, we got to overhaul how we approach our relationships or we got to overhaul how we approach problem solving. It was just really making sure that we were able to communicate, that approach and the value and what differentiates us.
That's a great lesson, one for companies, but two also for individuals. It's a mental model for me is most people drastically underestimate the amount of effort that is required to achieve a result. So if I sit there and you talk about like there was a lot of the building blocks in place. So it could have been easy as a leader or a business to be like, we've been winning work for the last 30 years doing hard bids. Like we can do this. And then they don't put in that new go-to-market strategy effort to have a chance at winning these CM at risk bids. And then so they're sitting there saying that we have the competency and therefore we should be successful in this new generation of business. But what they didn't do is they didn't put in the effort to build the infrastructure and the consistency on the approach to change the outcome. And so I applaud you in that perspective. And I think it's a great takeaway.
Yeah. No, it's easy to do that, right? And just say we should this or we should that. And it's also the stick with itness is tough. I mean, I think submitted on 35 or 38, or I forget the number now, but I mean, we were, well into 30 to 40 proposals where we were not selected as the CM before we ever got our first CM proposal, right? So to keep showing up to the interviews, keep sending in the RFPs, keep being optimistic when you're not getting selected. And, not getting selected as a CM is tough because you interview, right? And they say, no, we're choosing someone else, right? It's, when you bid a job, you see the numbers, you say, we were second. Oh, I'd never do it for that guy's price. The CM is there's more emotion involved in it because you're going and putting your brand and your people and your approach out there, and they're choosing to work with you or not,
Or
you know.
not. Yeah, you're right. Like there's a little bit more of an ego ding there if you're not like building awareness to what's going on. I wanna help people see the transformation that's happened. So in 2011, when you join, uh, you come back to Fontaine Brothers in this expanded role. Fast forward to today, you've gone from about 65 million to about what's revenue today?
This year we'll do about 450 million.
450 million. So that's like tremendous growth, like an amazing transformation. So I applaud you and the team. Could you talk to us about concentration risk versus diversification? Like, how do you think about your core business sectors when you look at that scale from 65 to 450 million? How are you diversifying your risk, or like how are you betting on concentration for leverage and winning those bids?
Yep. So our kind of model and philosophy on different markets has, I think, stayed pretty consistent, even, with the growth and everything. We've always had a really strong foothold in the public market, right? Like we don't go in and out of it. We don't only retreat to public when private is slow. We always keep a really consistent focus on public work. Obviously, we are seeing right now, and we've seen through the other, great financial crisis, that public work is a little bit more steady and, a little bit more resistant to, interest rates and, kind of macro stuff, because generally these are, large investments that need to be made, or even when times are slow, money gets poured into some public work from time to time. So we've always made sure that, we keep really focused on being well positioned for that in the geographies that we work in and the sectors that we're strong in. Public schools have been a huge part of our business and our focus since the 50s. And, that will not change. We're experts in that space. And, we're just building on that expertise and continuing to get stronger there. Um, we historically and now have been focused on, that kind of outside of Boston geography, right? Like we're not doing any work in Cambridge or inside that belt. We've certainly moved over the last 10, 15 years a lot further east and, kind of southeast, and covered the rest of Massachusetts pretty well. We opened another office in Worcester in 16 or 17, I think. And that's been, a huge success for us. It's attracted a lot of staff that live in that central Mass, Eastern Mass geography and want to work in that geography instead of, having to fight the commute in and out of the city. But I think that, we've always thought two things. Like, number one, public is a sector we like. It's a great place to focus on. We've built a lot of expertise in it, and we want to stay consistent there. That helps us with, not being so caught off with the private ups and downs. And on the private side, we do have a lot of private relationships, a lot of repeat clients in the independent school world and the higher ed world, some developers. So we don't like shy away from or, turn down those opportunities, but we want to build recurring repeat types of relationships in that space. Um, and I think that, when we look at where we want to focus, like we want to be strong in the geographies that our people live in, right? We want to know who's going to be running our projects before we go pursue them. So over the last like 5, 6, 7 years, we've done a lot more healthcare in Springfield and in Worcester and in, the western part of the state, because that's another sector that, is relationship based, that, someone with union agreements can be successful in, and that, there was a lot of opportunity in geographies we were already strong.
Yeah, I like that picture. It's like starting to move out of your core market sector to build these complementary relationships in adjacent market sectors, but also diversifying geographically across the state, right? Western, central, southeast, northeast. You're staying outside of that central Boston hub, but there's a ton of leverage and you're really de-risking your portfolio and giving yourself more growth opportunity.
And I would also say like that we have never set on that course from 60 to 450. Like we've never set a revenue target. We've never said, we need to grow this much this year. And, a lot of the growth in revenue has been driven by the size of our projects increasing, right? Like we used to do 2010 numbers, a 50 or $60 million job is a 250 or $300 million job today, right? So we used to have, a couple large projects, couple small projects. I feel like our average project size has increased. I think it's probably 80 to 100 million now, but we've stayed really focused on like not getting ourselves overcommitted. We still choose to not pursue more opportunities every year than we do choose to pursue. So I think that you know, like growth has happened as a result of staying focused on doing a good job, hiring the right people, training and stuff like that. And we're happy that it's happened, and it's helped to make the business successful and drive the ability to continue to further all the things that we want to do. But I think that when you target growth on its own as a metric, that is not a good idea in construction.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Growth is the byproduct of creating a great place to attract talent, retain talent, and put them in a position to succeed so that your customers can also succeed. And then everybody demands more of the business. But I think you hit that, like saying no is the most important thing that's also super difficult for leaders.
hmm It is, right? Because, you take a client that wants to work with you, and, if you say, hey, we can't pursue this at this time, they're likely going to build the project and they're going to use someone else, and they're going to, form a relationship with that person that might be hard to displace. And so it is difficult to make those decisions, but it's also, you can't set yourself up for failure, right? And you can't go in and, disappoint a client either. So it's definitely a balancing act, on both sides of that.
Saying no protects your your the customers that matter most to you. I think the thing the the dangling fruit or the dangling carrot in front of you can be all that, like in a bull market, there's an abundance of work opportunity and you don't want to say no. So you keep saying yes. And then now all of a sudden you're behind on your forecasting, your staffing. So you got to hire next available, not best qualified to deliver this job. And so you're taking a risk, but that's really a risk for your new customer, or worse, your existing long-term customer. And so saying no protects that ability to deliver.
Yeah, and also like with our focus in, this market in Massachusetts, and, with repeat clients and everything, like we can't really afford to have a bad project and just say like, oh, we'll go focus on, another region, or, oh, we'll move some of these people down there into, the southern data center market or those things. So like we're very cognizant of, we've got to make sure that when we're going to propose, and, ultimately if we're successful on a project, we have to have a plan for it to be successful from the, before we even pursue it.
Construction is known to be very slow to adopt technology and innovation. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think construction is very non-repeatable, right? Like as much as it seems like we use the same things on every job, the circumstances are different, codes are changing, all the players on the job are different every time, right? So I think that it's something where it's hard to, get the value like you can get in some other industries immediately, right? Out of something that can be done, a million times over in a month, right? Um, I also think that there, hasn't been a lot of, um, there hasn't been a lot of melding of like the software development and kind of AI skill set with, the skill set that it takes to deeply understand construction. I think it's something that takes, decades to like really become an expert in this field. And, I think that there hasn't been the development um, driven by builders on the software side. So I think a lot of the things that have been made, we've certainly seen a couple be successful, but more often than not, they're just not heavily adopted because they're not really custom fit for the industry.
When did you first dig into construction technology?
So I was fortunate. I went to Bentley in Boston. A lot of my friends after college went into venture capital, private equity, finance, accounting, different, totally different spaces than construction. And keeping in touch with them, learning about all those different industries, seeing what people were doing in, the venture space really interested me, right? And, there's a firm called Hyperplane Venture Capital that a friend of mine worked at starting in 2015 when they were formed. And they've been 100% focused on AI and machine learning since 2015. And one of the sectors that they've looked at things in since 2015 is construction, property tech, real estate, all those things. So I've been fortunate to be around those guys for over a decade now in reviewing things that come through for investment, investing in some companies, advising some companies, and really just keeping my head in understanding software tech and AI. And so over the last, several years, 2, 3 years where generative AI and all that stuff's really become commercially available, it's been really exciting. We've used a lot of it at the company. We've actually started a platform to develop our own softwares and use them internally as well.
What technologies have impressed you the most over the last decade, and which ones are you implementing at Fontaine?
Yeah, so I think a lot of what's like when you look at tech over the last 10 years and you think about, the cameras, the low power batteries, the sensors, all these things that are like commonplace and commercially available and relatively inexpensive now. If you go back to 2015, right, those things were pipe dreams or they were prohibitively expensive to deploy at scale. So I think from a broad perspective, what's impressed me is the way that the hardware and the software and the programming and all that have gotten to the point where now you can, wire up all those things, run AI or software on the back end, right, to get that data and intelligence. I think that that's a piece of this whole revolution that's going on. And what's going to, really help the construction field is like where you can capture, photos, videos, progress, all those things, and start to, actually couple that into the model and design and all that. So we're using software in different parts of the business right now. We're using it on the financial side for, costing, financial review, invoice review. We actually built an app that, tracks manpower each morning on project sites instead of collecting it manually. But we're focusing a lot on building point solutions that solve specific pain points that we doing this every day for 20 years are like, man, if you could, I think of it like if you could have, 1,000 finance people or interns or that kind of level of, you can, really go deep and analyze things with good direction. Like that's what I think people should be, doing right now with all the openly available tools.
A lesson I've learned in business is that if you're hesitating or unsure of what decision to make, means you probably have a lack of data. And I think what you're alluding to with technology is you can start to leverage tech to make sure you have the right data, to make sure not only you as a business leader, but also your team has the right information in front of them to make an informed decision.
Right. It's data and then it's patterns, right? So, the people who are building every day in this field, you take your superintendents or like they've seen these things over and over again to the point where they know where the risk is. They know, what needs to be done to avoid a sub falling behind. And so like I think that for a lot of people who are experienced construction folks, like their pattern recognition and intuition is unbelievable, right? And you walk around the site with a super, that's all that they're doing, right? They're looking, this looks a little off. Why is this guy, up here instead of like, and I think that that's something that's very hard to explain to the traditional like software, kind of approach, right? Because it's all like, you know, what do you mean this connects to that? But then I think that when you can start to synthesize those patterns, you can start to connect the data back. That's where you get, really good leading indicators and stuff.
Yeah, that point of like the super that's seen it a million times and walking around a job site, it's like he understands the critical path. He understands the portion of the building that they're trying to fix. And then he sees their sub on the wrong corner of the building or the wrong level. It's like, hey, like him not being in this corner is gonna hurt my schedule, and therefore I need to go tell him to get over here. And it's like, how do you train or use tech to do that? One of the things I notice in technology, or one of the reasons I think technology and innovation is lacking in design, real estate, and construction is one, how it's capitalized. It's two, it's an investment, it's an institutional investment vehicle at scale outside of like public or institute, but commercial real estate, private developer work. And so you have GP money, you have very high risk capital going in to create these opportunities, to create these investment vehicles, which means there's not that a ton of capital yet. You don't have a funded deal to start to invest in optimizing the early stages. So you're spending a little bit to create the investment vehicle. And then once that happens, now you got to build it. And then so we create all this, we kind of kick the can, and then we have to create all these issues. But when you think of all the dozens and dozens of companies that come together to create a commercial real estate asset, you're fragmented in your delivery. And then so from a software solution, software is solving each one of those fragmented parts. So when I think of the design to bid to subcontractor world, like in terms of steel, or like we do a lot of wood and steel buildings, right? Podium buildings. It's like we're designing across spreadsheets in several different softwares, then taking that design, and now Revit's just a communication tool. You're not actually engineering anything in a Revit. It's a communication tool across disciplines that then creates drawings that then go to your team, that then go to subs who goes to other software, and then back to drawings. And then there's this review process. So it's like super antiquated in how that communication flow, but it stems from I could relieve all of that for structure. And I think we might be the first ones to innovate in terms of a discipline. I have to worry about 3 SKUs: steel, concrete, or wood, some form of those 3 things, right? So like, but you look at an architect's, they got a billion SKUs over there. Like they have a lot to manage. On our side, I could deliver construction drawings to you and your team, but our fee would probably be 5 to 8x a design fee to be able to do that with the current technology. But I think technology is going to advance, that's going to reduce that cost, that in the future I see us providing construction drawings.
Yeah, that'll be that'll be super interesting to see how software, AI, all those things impact architecture, design, engineering, right? Because I think you hit it on the head. It's so many different pieces of information and processes to coordinate and synthesize. And, like I take in our world, I know you had Light Table on a couple weeks ago. We've used them. And it just, you could sit someone down as a human and say, match up mechanical and structural, go through this, go underground. Whereas like we know what to look for. We've run into these problems. It's the man hours involved in doing that coordination for, the problem solving and the kind of the benefit around the edges. I think that we've been in a resource constrained industry for a long time, in the sense that you take a project manager or super, right? Like how much of their time, even the best pre-con people, do you spend on different problems and different risks to solve, right? When you have thousands of SKUs coming from all over the world for a project. So I think like we see it as benefiting us in terms of like being able to repeat that horsepower of all these processes that we know how to do, and wanting to verify for us lead times on every material, actual installation durations on every material verified by the subs, right? Just, it's like, if you could just put all your best practices to work, how would you do it? But I think that the ultimate thing will be like, how do you get design and procurement and construction more unified and the data more connected, right? Because that's ultimately where a lot of the breakdowns, cost impacts, schedule impacts happen, is somewhere along those lines. And how do you synthesize? You take the architect perspective, they're getting feedback and input from all different user groups, from all different, people that have, you take the commercial real estate side, different tenants, this, that. So like, I think that that's what at the top of the funnel, the information, decision making, and input process getting streamlined into design and procurement would be a huge advancement.
And this all kind of connects back to like even the shift in delivery that we just talked about, from hard bid to CM at risk, that required a different go-to-market strategy. I think technology is going to flip how we actually deliver new large scale developments.
I
Like I
100%
think
agree, right?
construction could end up prime, because like if design and construction technology advances, it's almost a more collaborative effort on the initial pre-con and budget. And then once it's funded, then it's go, but it's more collaborative. So it almost makes construction potentially prime in the future.
Yeah, that's a possibility. I think, we see it the same way. And like when I look back at the last 30 years of my career being around the industry, I think you take the CM at risk change, like that was as big of a change in procurement and everything as we've experienced. And it took us some time to catch up to it, right? And there was a period of time where we didn't, kind of jump after it, and we lost some ground, and we had to fight back and all those things to get here. So for me, I'm interested in AI and software. I've been around it for a long time. It's something that I'm passionate about and like to learn about and implement for our business. But I also see it as something that is going to completely wholesale during the course of my career change, all kinds of things up and down the chain. So we just decided that rather than, sit around and, look at what logos people are sharing and what they're using and kind of chase what people are doing, we're like, we know where the problems are, and we know, where the value can be unlocked, and we're going to, get involved in building it for ourselves and driving it forward.
Use H&L, our company, as an example on how things have even shifted over the last 10 or 15 years. And we kind of identified this problem that the industry, and I was guilty of this too, just expected a structural engineer to know how to design a cost-effective building. But then we had plenty of examples that showed that there was some disconnect between the two. And then we kind of objectively reflected and we're like, well, is that a realistic expectation if an engineer has never been trained in cost estimating, has never estimated a building, has no cost data tied to their design process or quality management process? And we said, of course not. And then we looked at like, well, what percentage of a total development cost is a structural engineering fee and how much is the structure? It's like, okay, so this is like a small, like fraction of a percent investment in a consultancy, and they control potentially 15 to 20% of the hard costs of a development. And there's nothing in between that's actually driving good decision making around cost. It's around quality structural design, which is first and foremost got to be safe. But it's like, if I look back 20 years ago, like when we're talking about your transition, it's the technology didn't exist to be able to do that within a reasonable cost, given the delivery of a commercial real estate development. Technology has allowed us to do that within our own firm so that we could actually manage the cost of the structures we design. And that was like a totally shift, but otherwise it's a limiting belief if you don't rethink delivery method.
And I think that it's hard to, be kind of intentional about like taking those views to like, it's so easy in the industry, and we're all guilty of it, where like there's things happening every day. You got hundreds of people on job sites that need information, need coordinate, you got a proposal to like, you get so pulled into everything that's urgent and important in your day to day that like taking the time out like you guys did, or like we're trying to do with AI and these other things to look at bigger picture on your business type problems, and where's the industry going and how do we respond to that or meet that in a way where we're forward thinking and can provide real value. Construction is one of those. It's like for as much time as there is in pre-construction and planning the projects, there's never enough time, it feels like, to say, stop, let's go back if we could do this perfect. Because if you do, each project is a one-off thing, you're on to the next one. So it's not like we're building the same building 15 times over in the exact same spot. It's impossible. So I think that, we spend a lot of time doing that, lessons learned and reviewing for the next job, but it's something that you really have to be, disciplined about, because otherwise you just get, oh, we'll do that next time, right? We're pulled into, this deliverable that's due Friday.
How do you differentiate? But it's how do you communicate your differentiation? Because it's like if you and your team understand how you're different or better than somebody else, it's like, does your customer understand that they would be able to explain it to somebody without you there? And then so it comes back to that go to market and how are we communicating? And to me, it was really important for us to find some way of creating measurable value. Because like you said, you're in a meeting and it's against 10 other qualified CMs. How do you manage? You could have a good relationship, and I found this, like, "Hey, you guys are awesome. You crushed the last job. Were you excited to work with you? But you're $10,000 more than somebody else. You're $30,000 more, and it's like $100,000, $100 million deal, $50 million deal. It doesn't matter." And it's like, well, are we worth the extra money? Or like, how do we know? Like, how would we expect them to know if we can't can and then that's what led down this path of like unwinding that, right? Because it's like if you can create measurable value, then it becomes no because it's an investment, right? Not an expense if there's an investment and a return on it.
Yeah, totally, right, and, I think that the industry, as technology improves, as design gets more, coordinated and unified, like, I think that all that stuff's just going to become more important, not less important. I think that some of the day-to-day information processing and, engineering and the things that, um have been, sometimes pain points, sometimes not on jobs based on teams. Like my guess is that over the next 10 years, those are going to actually become less of a pain point because I think things will be better connected. And so I think in that scenario, like that's what we're looking forward and saying what's going to become more important is people skills, how you approach and solve problems, right? How you, manage and unify teams. Like that's already important. But I think that if construction, engineering, design, say, becomes, for lack of a better word, easier, right? Like it's never going to be easy, but some of these things go away, then like what's left is, what's the soft skills side of that relationship? And do you do what you say you're going to do? And do you, like bring up problems and tell the truth and be transparent and bring solutions and all those things? Like that's um, some of the values that we've always tried to stick with, but like I think they're just going to become more and more and more important the better that technology gets.
What's the greatest business lesson you've learned running Fontaine that you didn't learn in business school?
In construction, there are so many complicated pieces of backstory and, this and that to like some kind of a problem situation, whatever you've got to resolve, right? And it is like very, very, very rare that, someone is just dead wrong and the other person dead right. And, you're at this inflection point. And, I don't think I've ever had a situation where, no matter how like, you straightforward you feel it is, you never have a subcontractor or someone that just says, you know what, Dave, thank you for calling. I am totally in the wrong here and I'm just going to fix this for you and move on. Right. So I think that like those relationships with our partners, with, our team, with all those people, like you got to talk to people and understand, their perspective and, what happened last week and where it's going. And, is something going on with their whatever, their personal life. Like I think that construction is a people business. I was on a job site this morning and there's, 180 people there putting the finishing touches on this building, right? And you can't do that without their buy-in and their dedication and them wanting to do the right thing, right? So I think you've got to just no matter what happens, like you've got to have those relationships with people.
Great advice. Picking up the phone, it's like, you learn this in communication. It's like only 7% of communicating is the words that you actually say. It's like how you say it and the tone and the mannerisms that you have, your facial expressions. And it's like, you can't convey those things in an email. So if you find yourself in somewhat of a tense situation or like gray area, it's way better to pick up the phone because you can actually manage how that message is received and get to a result.
Yeah. And I think things get solved much faster, right? Like that's, you see so many emails that fly back and forth and there's one person says, all right, well, this, and it's going to be stuck here until this person gets me this information or whatever, right? So I think that it's not just that it's the right thing to do from a relationship building perspective. I think it genuinely solves a lot of problems faster getting the people together. And we always say like if you're going to write an RFI about a conflict or something, like go get the opinion and the buy-in of the foreman who are going to be implementing or installing the solution because they've got to build it. They probably have good ideas about the safest, most efficient, et cetera way. And we need to obviously get that reviewed and blessed by all the people who need to bless it, right? But rather than just send off a question to Boston or whatever, wait for a response from someone not on the job site to come back and then say that's not going to work because of this, go get with the people and propose a solution that makes sense.
I second that advice, Dave. I call that first when you just fire off random questions without answers or conversation. I call it playing tennis. You're just like volleying the ball back and forth over the net. But it's like, if you want to get something done, propose an answer. It's a lot easier to say yes or yes, but this, and this than to come up with a brand new solution. It's like, make sure they have the information to make a decision that's aligned with what you want. And then you're going to find a better path forward. Dave, I could keep going all day. We didn't even get to golf, but I'll wrap up today's conversation. I know you're an avid reader. What's a book that you might recommend to the audience today?
A book that comes to mind, like I read a couple months ago, it's called Same as Ever by Morgan Housel. And it's that combination of like a little bit of history, a little bit of psychology, a little bit of business, but kind of timely with, things that are going on or patterns that you see repeating in the economy and, social dynamics, whatever. So I thought it was pretty interesting and, kind of gives you a good perspective on how decisions get made, how people work, and how things that are happening now have happened over the course of history and, kind of how to look at them.
I know Morgan for his book Psychology and Money. This is a new one, so I'll have to check it out. But I like how it comes back to psychology, like something I've learned in my with all the business books that I've read, like executive management, how do you sell, how do you market, how do you all of those things. I just like this is psychology just through a different department in the business, but it's like all rooted in the same psychological principles. And so this one sounds along those lines. I'd love to check it out. Dave, thank you for sharing your journey and talking to us today about the great things happening at Fontaine. I applaud the generational transition and the resiliency it takes on your way to 100 years in business. I wish you and the team nothing but the best.
Thank you, Rens. Appreciate it.